Welcome ladies and gentlemen to the 24th installment of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links Best Deck series. Today I'm going to be showing you a deck called Gravekeepers. This video is long overdue as I've been trying to make a Gravekeepers deck for ages. It's just all the cards for this deck are really hard to get as they're all from farming, so it's kind of very RNG based whether or not you can actually get the cards or not. So it could take you a day to get it, or it could take you 7 months. So finally I've got all the pieces for this deck, so I decided to make a video on it. Sadly, I got all the pieces a bit late for the Gravekeeper's meta because it's kind of died down a lot in strength thanks to cards like Super Rush Headlong, which has kind of wrecked Gravekeepers, but it's still a strong deck, so I thought it was worth making a video on. Alright, so the best character for this deck is literally anyone, as the best skill for the deck is Restart. Restart can only be used once your starting hands are dealt and allows you to redraw your starting hand. So the reason this is the best skill for this deck is there's no other skill that's kind of really good for Gravekeepers, so it's best just to use the skill that boosts the consistency of the deck significantly, which is Restart, as it boosts consistency of your starting hand, makes it more likely to get the starting hand you want, and the starting hand that gives you a good start to the game. Another skill that might be alright is maybe Balance, as Balance kind of, you can make a Gravekeeper's deck around Balance, as it gives you a guaranteed starting hand, but I just found that Restart is just better overall, as you can still get some really dead hands with Balance. Alright, now I'll go through the deck list. This deck contains 3 Gravekeeper's Recruiter, 3 Gravekeeper's Chief, 2 Gravekeeper's Oracle, 1 Legion the Fiend Jester, 3 enemy controllers, 2 Soul Exchange, 2 Double Summon, 2 Super Rush Headlong, and 2 Mirror Walls. So the first thing I'm going to say is there's a card called Dark General Freed, which a few people have been running in Gravekeepers. I don't own that card, so I haven't been able to playtest it in this deck or see if it's any good, but the deck certainly doesn't need Dark General Freed to run like it normally does in case its combo is working. The second thing I'm going to add is you'll notice this deck has a lot of 2-ofs in it. That's very relevant as the Super Rush Headlong and the Mirror Wall basically do the same thing, but they're good for different situations, so it's better to cover like all scenarios. Also, the card known as Double Summon and Soul Exchange are very good at getting your monsters out, your big tribute monsters, but once again, they're only good for certain situations, so it's better to have a variety of them. It becomes more apparent as to what situations you need Double Summon for and what situations you need Soul Exchange for when I go through the strategy later on in the video. And the last thing I'm going to add is you'll notice there's 1 Legion the Fiend Jester. That's because I wanted there to be 1 extra monster in this deck, as it's better for starting hands if you have kind of a half and half deck, so it's well balanced. And it's not like Legion the Fiend Jester is a bad card for the deck anyway, it's got good synergies with the deck, which I'll talk about later on in the video. Alright, now I'll talk about the strategy behind the deck. The strategy for this deck is fairly simple. Basically, you're just trying to get Gravekeeper's Oracle out so you can use its ability, which is very, very strong. The reason Gravekeeper's Oracle's ability is so strong is because it can cover 3 different scenarios. The first one is it allows you to destroy all face-down monsters your opponent controls. The second ability is it allows it to gain a bunch of attack depending on the level of the monster used to tribute summon it. And its third ability is it reduces all the attack and defense of every monster your opponent controls by 2000, which is going to be the most used ability, and it's very, very strong. One key thing to note about Gravekeeper's Oracle is it only requires 1 Gravekeeper's monster to tribute summon it, as opposed to 2 normal monsters, as every other level 7 or higher monster does. So to help get this monster out, this deck runs a bunch of summoning support spells, along with 2 Gravekeeper's monsters, which are very good at getting Gravekeeper's Oracle out of the deck, and also help get it onto the board. Most of your games are going to start with you playing Gravekeeper's Recruiter as your opener, as what Gravekeeper's Recruiter does is once it's destroyed, you can grab 1 Gravekeeper's monster from your deck and add it to your hand. So a good combo with this is you summon Gravekeeper's Recruiter, then use Double Summon, summon Gravekeeper's Chief on top of it, destroy Gravekeeper's Recruiter, send it to the graveyard, add Gravekeeper's Oracle to your hand, and then Gravekeeper's Chief's ability activates, which is it can grab 1 Gravekeeper's monster from your graveyard and add it to the field, and you can summon your Gravekeeper's Recruiter back to the board. Now you have a Gravekeeper's Recruiter, which is a great tribute for your Gravekeeper's Oracle, as well as a Gravekeeper's Chief on the board ready to go. This is kind of going to be the main combo you're going to be using for this deck. It's different ways you're going to be producing this combo, and most of the time you're going to be using your Gravekeeper's Chief on top of your Gravekeeper's Recruiter, then bringing back the Recruiter. Now normally I wouldn't include enemy controller in the strategy part of my deck, but I need to for this deck specifically as it provides such a big role in this deck. Basically, once you have a Gravekeeper's Recruiter on the board and an enemy controller on the board, you're able to use a really sick combo with it. What you do is you activate enemy controller, destroy your monster, take control of one of your opponent's monsters. That activates Gravekeeper's Recruiter's ability, so you can summon a Gravekeeper's Chief to your hand. Then you can activate a double summon, or if you haven't summoned this turn already, you can just play your Gravekeeper's Chief and use your opponent's monster that you just stole as tribute for it. So it allows you to destroy your opponent's monster as well as bring a Gravekeeper's Chief to the board, which once again activates the ability, which brings Gravekeeper's Recruiter to the board. So now you've destroyed your opponent's board as well as summoned 2 monsters. The last part of this deck is the defensive spells and traps. Those are basically in here just to protect your lower level Gravekeeper's monsters, so that your Gravekeeper's Oracle will always have a monster to use to summon it. They can obviously also be used to defend your Gravekeeper's Oracle once it's out on the board, as its stat line isn't too big, but most of the time it's just going to be used to keep your Recruiters alive and your Chiefs alive. Alright guys, if you didn't understand any of the strategy, don't worry, at the end of the video there will be gameplay which will showcase it, which will give you a rough understanding of it. But that's pretty much it for the strategy. Now I'll go through each of the cards individually for the deck and tell you what they do and how they function in the deck. I'll start with the monster cards. The first monster card in this deck is Legion the Fiend Jester. The reason Legion the Fiend Jester is in this deck is it effectively allows you to double summon without having the card double summon. What it does is it allows you to conduct an extra tribute summon on top of your normal summon for the turn, as long as you're tribute summoning a spellcaster type monster, which is what all the Gravekeeper's cards are. So basically it allows you to cast it, then cast Gravekeeper's Chief over the top of it. Gravekeeper's Recruiter is basically the card you're going to be using to fetch your more powerful Gravekeeper's monsters from your deck. What it does is once it dies, you can then grab a Gravekeeper's Chief or your Gravekeeper's Oracle from your deck and add them to your hand. This card has some very good synergy with Gravekeeper's Chief, as it effectively allows you to pull a Gravekeeper's monster from your deck to your hand without losing your Gravekeeper's Recruiter. Because if you use the Gravekeeper's Recruiter as a tribute for Gravekeeper's Chief, you can then bring Gravekeeper's Recruiter back to the board, as well as activate Gravekeeper's Recruiter's effect. Gravekeeper's Chief is your other powerful Gravekeeper's monster in this deck, and it's the card you're going to be using with Soul Exchange, which I'll talk about later on in the video. Like I've said before, basically the Chief's ability is it brings back one Gravekeeper's monster from your graveyard to the board. So this can target your Gravekeeper's Recruiter for that kind of sick combo, and it also can target your Gravekeeper's Oracle if it has already been destroyed. One thing to note though is it cannot bring back other Gravekeeper's Chiefs, as you can only have one Gravekeeper's Chief on the board at a time. The last monster in this deck is what the deck's basically built around, which is Gravekeeper's Oracle. Now I've spoken about what Gravekeeper's Oracle's effects does, but I'll talk about them again. Basically, once you've summoned it using a Gravekeeper's monster, it has 3 effects to choose from. The first one is it allows you to destroy all set monsters your opponent controls, so any card that's face down. The second ability is it allows you to gain a bunch of attack points based on the monster it used to tribute it. This is the one you'll use when you don't want to use the other 2, as it's by far the weakest. And the third ability, which is the one you're going to be using most of the time, is it reduces all monsters' attack and defense that your opponent controls by 2000, which completely diminishes their board. So most of the time you want to hold off on using your Gravekeeper's Oracle until your opponent has got a reasonably solid board for you to just destroy. Alright, now I'll go through the spells and traps in this deck. The first spell in this deck is Enemy Controller. Now I've spoken about what Enemy Controller does for this deck a bit earlier on in the video, but I'll talk about it again. What you do is you combine Enemy Controller with your Gravekeeper's Recruiter and your Gravekeeper's Chief for a pretty cool combo. You activate your Enemy Controller on your Gravekeeper's Recruiter to tribute it to take control of one of your opponent's monsters. This then allows you to use your Gravekeeper's Chief on top of your opponent's monster and use your opponent's monster as the tribute summon for it. So it destroys your opponent's monster and allows you to have your Gravekeeper's Chief on the board, which also allows you to bring the Recruiter, which you tributed, back to the board. So effectively, you've just destroyed one of your opponent's monsters and summoned a Gravekeeper's Chief for nothing. The obvious other use for Enemy Controller is you can activate it to change one of your opponent's monsters from attack position to defense position, or from defense position to attack position, but most of the time you're going to be using this effect when your opponent tries to attack one of your monsters. You can activate Enemy Controller and negate the attack. The next two cards in this deck provide the exact same role, as all they're doing is defending your monsters. And 90% of the time you're going to be using both these cards as bait for your opponent to swing into you for you to destroy his monsters. What Super Rush Headlong does is it allows you to target one monster your opponent controls and declare an attribute, so like light, dark, something like that. And before battle damage is conducted, that monster is destroyed. So any monster that battles with your monster from the selected attribute is destroyed. So as I said before, most of the time you're going to be using this whenever your opponent tries to attack your monster. You just activate Super Rush Headlong, select the attribute of the monster attacking you, and destroy it. Mirror may have a very similar use, but it has a very different effect. What it does is when your opponent attacks you, you activate your Mirror Wall, and from that point on, any monster that attacks you has its attack halved. So obviously, if your opponent attacks you with a 3000 attack monster and you have a 1600 attack thing on the board, your opponent's monster will go down to 1500 attack and be destroyed. So Mirror Wall is a very powerful card. It also has an added bonus over Super Rush Headlong, which is it allows you to use it again in the next turn without it being destroyed, as it's continuous, at the cost of 2000 of your life points, which most of the time you can spend. The last two spells in this deck are summoning support spells. Basically they're just used to get your big tribute monsters out on the board quickly. Soul Exchange is a lot more powerful than Double Summon, as what it does is it allows you to target one monster your opponent controls, and then for the rest of the turn you can use that monster as tribute for any of your powerful tribute monsters. So basically it allows you to get out a really powerful tribute monster and remove one of your opponent's powerful monsters all in the same turn, which is a really strong ability to use. Now this doesn't mean Double Summon isn't important compared to Soul Exchange in this deck, as Double Summon allows you to activate your Gravekeeper's combos a lot easier, whereas Soul Exchange doesn't really activate any of your Gravekeeper's combos, as well as Soul Exchange has the downside of you can't activate the battle phase once you've used Soul Exchange. What Double Summon does is very self-explanatory. It allows you to conduct a second summon during your turn. This means you can summon your Gravekeeper's Recruiter, activate Double Summon, and put your Chief down on the board and use your Gravekeeper's Recruiter as the tribute, which activates the combo again. Or even just play your Gravekeeper's Recruiter, then activate Double Summon and summon your Oracle straight onto the board. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for this video. Stick around if you want to see gameplay. I think there'll be 3 gameplay clips at the end of this video to show you how the deck runs and give you a brief demonstration of the deck in action. But otherwise, that's it from me. Thank you guys for watching, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and I hope to see you on the next one.
Duel! Duel! Duel!